Star Wars Episode 9 The Rise of Skywalker has proven to be another divisive movie among Star Wars fans, and even divisive among critics who are mostly in agreement on The Last Jedi. I certainly feel the split sentiments toward the movie. There were multiple elements that seemed like they could have helped make this the finale to Star Wars that it deserves, but other stuff that really kept it from being that. Now, I actually went to the theater having not read or listened to a single review, and I actually went in even more excited for it than I was for The Last Jedi. And the reason is because before The Force Awakens came out, we were given very few plot details. All we really knew was that it was just a new Star Wars movie. And so I go in thinking, what the heck is going on? And then before The Last Jedi came to theaters, I was like, okay, I've got an idea of what's going on, let's see what happens next. And before Rise of Skywalker, it was back to, what the heck is going on? And from the get-go, the movie automatically fills us in on some things, and does so in a very unsettling way. It starts with Kylo Ren going to that uncharted realm known as Exegol, and he enters what appears to be like a Sith temple or something. And he follows the voice of the Emperor, who we find out has been messing with his head all this time. I have been every voice you have ever heard. Inside your head. And it's at this point that it's revealed to us that Snoke was a creation of the Emperor's, and then those lightning flashes or whatever just light up his face. And I gotta say, I was surprised by the Emperor's appearance. I was expecting his famous deformed wrinkled self, but it actually turned out to be just Ian McDiarmid, just with his eyes clouded over. And the movie doesn't fully explain to us how the Emperor came back, though it does make it clear that he died. At first I just assumed that it was because of the powers of Darth Plagueis the Wise, when the Emperor repeats his line from Revenge of the Sith. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. And this would confirm what has been long suspected by fans, that he was the apprentice of Darth Plagueis who killed him in his sleep after he taught him everything he knew. But then again, later in the movie, when the Resistance finds out that the Emperor is indeed alive, someone brings up the idea of cloning. I'm leaning a bit more towards that, because the Emperor does appear to be somewhat immobile, and he's attached to this machine that I think is keeping him alive, which could mean that cloning comes with some defects. I also lean towards this more because there's a line about the new general, General Pride, having worked for the Emperor back in the day. And I take it that he survived the fall of the Empire and was leading this cloning technology to bring the Emperor back. If not, then I don't really see why they would make that connection in that line. And also because that's the way that the Emperor was brought back in the Dark Empire comic from 1991, which I know about because of a video from Mr. Sunday Movies that I saw a few days before the movie's release. And I gotta mention that in that comic, Luke Skywalker force projects himself 3 or 4 times, so yeah, before The Last Jedi, Force projections were not completely unheard of in Star Wars lore. Anyway, back to the Emperor. Some possibilities are brought forward, but I think the reason that it's not spelled out for us is to give us kind of a scary sense of mystery. And though the Emperor isn't seen in the movie very much, I wasn't really expecting him to be. I just wanted to be able to feel his presence through the whole thing, which can work. For example, in The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter is only in the movie for 16 minutes, but from the point that he's first described to Clarice Starling, before he even first appears, up until the very end, you just feel the evil in the air. And I really wanted to feel that way whenever I went back and saw Force Awakens and Last Jedi, to feel his presence now I know that he's been behind it all. But I rewatched The Force Awakens after seeing The Rise of Skywalker, and I just didn't get that. It's also been argued as to whether or not the Emperor coming back undermines Anakin Skywalker's return in Return of the Jedi. I would have to say, not really. Anakin did still save his son, and he brought peace to the galaxy for a time, and The Rise of Skywalker does make it clear that the Emperor did in fact die. So I'm really not bothered by the idea at all. And so after the Emperor has declared war on the Resistance, he sends Kylo Ren on a mission to take Rey captive, and meanwhile, Rey goes on a mission to find some Sith artifacts that'll lead them to the Emperor's location. It takes her, Finn, Poe, and C-3PO to a desert planet called Pisana, where some ceremony is taking place there, one that C-3PO says is only held every 42 years. Yeah, I see what they did there, because it's been 42 years since Star Wars began. And when they're there, they discover a Sith dagger with an ancient Sith language etched onto it. And in the cave where they find it, Rey uses her force powers to heal this injured serpent. Which people have asked in the last few weeks how Rey learned to do this, and I think the answer is pretty simple. She has Leia as her master, and she has the sacred Jedi texts, so she just studied them. But here's where I felt like this movie was starting to break some of the rules of the Force. I was honestly pretty okay with the new Force powers that were introduced in The Last Jedi, but here's something, however, that I cannot let slide. Someone using a Force power by accident. When some stormtroopers capture Chewie while he has the dagger, they appear to be taking off in the ship, and Rey is trying to use the Force to stop them from taking off. And then Kylo Ren steps in, and it becomes this tug-of-war, and as Rey is straining to keep it from taking off, she lets out Force lightning from her fingers, which she didn't know she had. How is that at all possible? We know from the past films that you need to concentrate, that you need to reach out, trust in the Force to use it. But I guess if you have the capability of Force lightning, you need to be just using a Force pull really hard and then twist your hand a certain way?
That's not how the Force works.
So it destroys the ship, and Rey thinks that she inadvertently killed Chewie, only for us to find out a few minutes later that that wasn't the ship he was on. And this leads to the one big thing that really got under my skin. Like I said in my spoiler-free review, I thought from the last trailer that there was something very meaningful going on with C-3PO that might give the character closure, which would seem appropriate seeing how he was created in Episode 1, and now he's getting a send-off in Episode 9. But instead, this is what happens. So while they still think Chewie is dead, C-3PO tells them that the inscriptions are now in his memory, and so they go to Babu Frick to have them extracted from his memory, but it would mean a complete memory wipe for C-3PO. C-3PO goes through with it, but even in that moment we know that it's a lost cause, because we've seen that Chewie is alive and he has the dagger. If that alone doesn't make his sacrifice meaningless, we find out later that it wasn't even much of a sacrifice at all. It turns 3PO into a one-joke character for the rest of the movie, where everything he says is just a joke on how he doesn't remember anything. This is Babu Frick, he's one of my oldest friends. And at the end, R2-D2 has a backup for 3PO's memory, so that whole subplot completely meant nothing. This was one of the most insulting bait-and-switches I've ever seen. So after Rey senses that Chewbacca is alive, they go on to Kylo Ren's Star Destroyer to save him. And it's here that we get the official answer as to who Rey is. Kylo Ren says to her, "You're Palpatine's granddaughter." Palpatine wanted to have her killed as a child because he saw what she could become, and so her parents sold her on Jakku to save her. The way that this reveal is written, though, feels like such a blatant retcon, and it didn't need to be. In The Last Jedi, Kylo Ren, after looking into her past, said to her that she comes from nothing, her parents were nobody. And even on my first viewing, I thought, there's something he's not telling her. He wanted to make it easy for her to let go of everything and go with him. And I soon found out that I wasn't the only one to whom it came across that way, so why didn't they just write it that way accordingly? Instead, what Kylo Ren says is, "I never lied to you. Your parents were nobody, but because they chose to be." But now wait a minute, he did lie to her. He might not have known her parents' motivation to hide her on Jakku, but he still told her that they sold her for drinking money, when in reality they sold her to protect her. And so that's really one of the biggest things that makes it obvious that there was no clear vision from the get-go for this trilogy as a whole. And the other reveal while they're on the Star Destroyer, General Hux was the mole in the First Order. Which I can kinda see that if he had turned his back on the First Order sometime between Force Awakens and Last Jedi, because it would explain why he didn't order for them to fire on Poe Dameron at the beginning of The Last Jedi. But he also got really mad during that Hitler-style speech of his in The Force Awakens. So after the heroes visit the remains of the Death Star on Endor to find the next MacGuffin, Rey and Kylo Ren get in a lightsaber duel, and it results in Rey running Kylo Ren through. In the meantime, Leia dies, sending all of her Force energy over to Kylo Ren in a last-ditch effort to help him turn. Sensing this herself, Rey force heals Kylo Ren and then takes off in his TIE Interceptor. After she leaves, Kylo Ren looks out at the ocean, and off-screen we hear, "Hey kid." First thought that went through my mind was, oh, it's Luke. But then, he turns around, and Han Solo is standing there. And I'm like, how can that be? He's not a Force ghost, he can't be, he's not Force sensitive, and he's not glowing blue or anything. I suppose it's sort of left to our interpretation, so here's what I think. After listening to all those voices that turned out to be the Emperor messing with his head, he has now seen what Rey and what Leia have both done for him, and now he's decided to start listening to some other voices. So that's why I think that Han has appeared in his head. In one of the movie's most affecting scenes, he tells Kylo that even though Leia is gone, it's never too late to come back home. So Kylo Ren finally turns and he throws his lightsaber into the sea, which I gotta say wasn't a very bright move though. He still needs some means of defense. I feel that it would have been better if he had thrown his mask, not his lightsaber. Now what I want to get into now is the criticism toward Rey coming from some people saying that she is a Mary Sue. As someone who is tired of the PC culture of Hollywood, I'm going on record to say Rey is not a Mary Sue. Captain Marvel is a Mary Sue. Rey is not. When the Skywalker lightsaber calls to her, she wants no part in it all. She just wants to run away and bury her head in the dirt. And even though she had heard about the things that the Force can be used for, it's made clear in The Last Jedi that she doesn't know everything about it. She doesn't even really know what the Force itself is.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
And later, she really got overpowered by Snoke, and Kylo Ren ended up having to save her. Yeah, needing a man to save you from time to time. She's pretty bad at being a Mary Sue, if you ask me. And in The Rise of Skywalker, she repeats her past mistake of not confronting her fear and just running away, which was also Luke's mistake. She flies back to the island that Luke went to, and is ready to just strand herself there like he did. So as we can see, she is a strong heroine who has flaws. And as she throws the lightsaber into the fire, the ghost of Luke reaches out of the fire and catches it. He walks out and he's like, "The Jedi's weapon deserves more respect." A lot of people have seen this as a jab at The Last Jedi, referring to the early scene where Luke tosses the saber over his shoulder, but that's really not the case at all. What it really is a testament to how his character changed over the course of that movie. And so he has a talk with her about how the destiny of a Jedi is confronting their fear. He gives her Leia's lightsaber as well as his own, and then something happens that is a little too late. As I watched The Last Jedi for the first time, what I thought was going to happen, and what I still think should have happened, is when Luke regains his confidence in what the Jedi can be, that he was going to use the Force to raise his X-Wing from the waters. Thus, we're seeing him do what he failed to do in Empire Strikes Back. That would have been just fantastic. And that's what happens here. Luke raises his X-Wing from the waters to give Rey a mode of transportation over to Exegol. It was good to see, it just didn't have the effect that it would have had it happened in The Last Jedi. But better late than never, I suppose. So once the Resistance has the coordinates to Exegol, they start putting together their plan on fighting what the Emperor calls the Final Order. It's here that the movie tries to make an attempt to explain why they can't just use the Holdo maneuver, using light speed as a weapon for every battle, but the explanation is so half-baked. One Resistance fighter proposes pulling a bunch of Holdo maneuvers on all those Star Destroyers, but Finn dismisses the idea, saying that it's 1,000,001 shot. Is it now? Is it? Because if you really aim properly, those Star Destroyers are really big, you have a gigantic target. I don't see how you can miss that easily. So they all fly into Exegol to fight that mammoth fleet of Star Destroyers, and they're joined later by hundreds of other ships from across the galaxy, where we even get to see a cameo from Dennis Lawson back as Wedge Antilles. And so meanwhile, Rey goes in to confront the Emperor and he wants her to kill him so that he can pass his spirit into her and possess her. Kylo Ren comes in to join the battle, and the Emperor sucks out of them the power that Snoke gave to them, and it's now making him mobile, and he's taking on his famous deformed appearance, and his eyes are now glowing. He looked like the nun from the Conjuring movies. To this movie's credit, I did find the Emperor legitimately scary in this. When Kylo Ren gets back up again, the Emperor knocks him off some cliff, just so that he climbs back up a few moments later. That drop looked pretty darn big. How the heck did he survive that, much less have the strength to climb back up again? Whatever the case, what follows, I think, is the best part of the movie. As Rey is still lying there, she reaches out for guidance, and we hear the voices of dozens of past Jedi speaking to her. And we hear the voices of all the old actors. We hear Mace Windu, Qui-Gon Jinn, Yoda, even Aayla Secura and Luminara and Unduli. We hear Anakin say, "Rey, bring balance as I did." We hear Obi-Wan say, "Rey, these are your final steps. And Luke saying, the Force will be with you, always. And it gives her the power to get back up and go head to head with the Emperor. If they were going to bring back the Emperor, the mastermind who is behind everything, this is what should have happened. All the Jedi coming together to give this one person power to take him down completely. She's got Leia's lightsaber and she's deflecting his Force lightning, and while that's happening he says, I am all the Sith. So death brought you from Senate to Sith, eh? And Rey responds, and I am Iron Man. Seriously, was there a single person in the theater who wasn't thinking about that? So yeah, she actually says, I am all the Jedi, whips out Luke's lightsaber as well, giving her more power, and she just fries the Emperor. Gotta ask though, considering the fact that there's no real answer as to how the Emperor came back, suppose for instance that it was cloning, if someone survives the fall of the Final Order, couldn't they just use the technology to bring the Emperor back again? Just what exactly makes his death here any more permanent than the first one? In any case, Rey has used up all her Force energy and dies, but Kylo Ren comes in, gives her all of his. And before he therefore bites the dust, he and Rey share a kiss. A lot of people think that that was there just to appeal to the Reylo crowd, but you know, they were really caught up in the moment. Even if there wasn't anything romantic between them before that, it still kind of felt right. So after the Final Order is completely wiped out, Rey goes down to Tatooine to bury Luke and Leia's lightsabers, having constructed her own. She activates it and it's yellow. So I guess between Mace Windu's purple and her yellow lightsaber now that Jedi can just have any color lightsaber other than red. A passerby asks her what her name is, and with Luke and Leia's spirits watching her, she's inspired to say, Rey Skywalker. Many have said that it would have been better for her to say Rey Palpatine, thus bringing something good to a name that has been so infamous. And that would have been great. In fact, I almost feel like it would have been better if the title of the movie was The Rise of Palpatine. Because after we hear his cackle in the first trailer, we just assume that it's referring to him, but then we find that there's a double meaning when we find out that it's also referring to Rey. Kind of similar to how before seeing Return of the Jedi, anyone would just assume that the title is referring to Luke, when in reality, it's referring to Anakin and his return to the light side. However, I don't think it would go so well for Rey when other people across the galaxy see that she is proudly taking that infamous name. So I guess I would have been fine either way. Months before this movie came out, Kevin Smith said that he saw the final shot of The Rise of Skywalker, and he said that it was going to melt your mind. But even when Rey came to Tatooine, I knew what it was going to be. It was Rey looking out at the binary sunset, calling back to Luke's famous moment in New Hope. It's pretty much what anyone would expect. And so, that is the concluding chapter in the Skywalker saga. And ultimately, I think this is one of the weaker installments in Star Wars. I think overall it's okay, but I think it makes the whole sequel trilogy feel less than it could have been. Even though I think George Lucas is a bad writer, I think that he is a great visionary. And what he has said about Star Wars is that what the series as a whole revolves around is the tragedy of Darth Vader. Despite The Last Jedi's flaws, I really liked the direction that it seemed to be taking the trilogy in. Considering the fact that in that movie, Luke sees all the flaws in the Jedi Order that have led to Sith uprisings in the past as well as the present, I thought that Episode 9 would be about Rey leading the Jedi Reformation. And thus, that would mean that the essence of the sequel trilogy really does revolve around the tragedy of Darth Vader. But instead, The Rise of Skywalker just kind of played it safe, and what the whole sequel trilogy amounts to in the end is just the Skywalker name being carried on after Luke and Leia's deaths. On top of the fact that it feels more like a video game movie than a Star Wars movie, it's kind of overstuffed, and the action is lackluster, it just kind of makes a mess out of the sequel trilogy. I did appreciate how it honored the Jedi legacy as we hear all those voices giving Rey strength, but overall, I feel like the sequel trilogy could have been a lot more. Now with all of that said, this does not change my thoughts on The Force Awakens. I still feel the same way about that movie as I do the original trilogy. I am never going to forget how I felt seeing my first Star Wars film in the theater. How I got so hooked when I knew that I was on a true new Star Wars adventure when Rey and Finn were flying the Millennium Falcon through those crashed Star Destroyers with TIE fighters on their tail. Or what it was like seeing where all the old characters were at that point, or how we got such a complex antagonist in just one movie, and how the audience just applauded when Han, Leia, and R2-D2 all appeared on screen, and how stunned silent they were when Luke turned around at the end. Honestly, I kind of feel like something that was missing from Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker was Lawrence Kasdan's writing. He wrote Force Awakens, and he is the writer of the two best Star Wars films. But overall, Last Jedi I think is good, and Rise of Skywalker just okay. So I do want to hear from you guys. Do you feel the same way? Do you love this movie and all three in the trilogy, or do you hate all three? Your opinion is always welcome here, so be sure to let me know in the comments. That's a wrap, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and share, subscribe for more. This is Pop Culture, I'm Alex Pop, and the Force will be with you. Always.